Let's take a quick look at the stories that have been making headlines across this week internationally. We begin in South Africa, where Cyril Ramaphosa was re-elected president following the formation of a government of national unity between the African National Congress, the white-led Democratic Alliance, and smaller parties. It is the first time in the post-apartheid era that ANC lost its majority, and the second time it has entered into a government of national unity. A similar deal helped stabilize the transition to full democracy from a nation divided by the racist system of apartheid. Sudan's Darfur once again finds itself on the International Criminal Court's radar, with ICC prosecutor Karim Khan making a call for information on ethnically motivated attacks and rape being used as a weapon of war by warring groups. Khan says they have an active investigation ongoing at the referral of the UN Security Council. The civil war in Sudan, which has entered its second year and which pits the Sudan Armed Forces against the Rapid Support Forces, formerly known as Janjaweed, is viewed as largely being ignored by the international community. According to the United Nations, Sudan is now the world's largest displacement crisis, with about 9 million people forced to flee their homes. In the last month alone, over 220 people are reported as having been killed in the Darfur town of Al-Fashar as the militants seek to control access to aid.
It is an outrage that we are allowing history to repeat itself once again in Darfur. We cannot and we must not allow Darfur to become the world's forgotten atrocity once again.
Les amis, nous pas gain illusion.
Haiti's Prime Minister Gary Conille this week named a new cabinet 2 weeks after taking office. He takes on the role of Interior Minister. Haiti, however, remains without a president and parliament following the assassination of their president almost 3 years ago now. Your thoughts on those events, Professor Kawanja? We start with South Africa, Government of National Unity. There was a Government of National Unity when apartheid ended and Nelson Mandela substantively took office, but my assumption was that had more to do with the transition. This is the first one in 30 years on account of ANC losing their majority. Yes, and the ANC itself found itself in a very hot soup, because it had gotten 40% of the vote, way below what it had gotten in the previous year. And even the previous year, 2019, it was at an all-time low. So in other words, the party has almost disintegrated from the nationalist party it was to now a party that is to govern through coalitions. But the downside to this is that the coalition formation has not gone to heal what you can call rifts within the ANC fraternity. Because what the ANC has faced are multiple rebellions. First by the youth led by Julius Malema, which now became the main opposition in the previous government. And now by Jacob Zuma, who has cooped out of the ANC 14% of whatever. If Ramaphosa went for the healing the ANC, he would not have needed any coalition or government of national unity with the Democratic Alliance, which is white-led and which is basically growing. And the moment it takes over power, then the question will be whether there was necessary it was need to end apartheid, because that is the party of the apartheid era. But on that note, strange bedfellows, no?
Yes. Well, politics is a game of strangeness. You have there the DA and the ANC in one bed. It's something very interesting. But it's a transition period. It shows that the ANC has lost, such that it has to bend backward to accommodate the direct opposite. That arrangement gives room for people like Malema to increase his effectiveness, because now he can become the real opposition to this government of national unity, and he can exploit that very well, such that his stature goes up. Zuma is still there, but I think it's more to Malema to exploit the opportunity than to Zuma, although Zuma got more than Malema. But I think the opportunity is more to Malema than to Zuma to be now the main opposition team.
Not Zuma, I would imagine. Zuma, I mean, this was the first general election MK was taking part in. I think they took part in some. Was it 3 months?
Yes, 3 months, yes.
So...
Well, there is a point there, but I could be wrong. I don't think I am. Zuma, yes, he's a charismatic fellow. And he can dance. Those things. And you look at his party, actually it's confined to one place. Natal, mostly. But Malema has a chance of being in almost every part of South Africa, depending on how he markets himself, and be seen as now as a national leader of the opposition in South Africa, instead of being a leader of a section of South Africa, because that's what Zuma appears to be.
What does it tell you, Dr. Maluki, about is South Africa now entering a new era?
Well, it's not just South Africa. I think for me, this is a reflection of political party politics in Africa, that we really have, strong political parties that keep to their ideals and their philosophy. It has to do with the short-sightedness on political leader. And I think even the question of governance is because we do not have political parties that actually ruled by principles, ideology, and a specific focus. Now, ANC was a very strong political party. It mobilized South Africans against apartheid regime, and yet now you can see it splintering. It shows that something is actually amiss within the leadership of ANC, and therefore you can also replicate this in other African countries. We always go into election with a different political party. I mean, in Kenya, it's a good example of what is happening. So what we are seeing in South Africa is a trend in African leadership. It's a governance issue, and you cannot have democracy in a government if the political party is not democratic. You must be able to, accommodate dissent and bring consensus in matters that are of national importance. So I think maybe some sort of intolerance, has led other people within the NC to look for alternative voices, and that's exactly a governance issue.
I'm hearing you say it's an issue of in Africa.
That's
Kanu,
true.
let me talk about Kanu, for instance.
Yes, yes.
An extension of the colonizers, where a few get rich at the expense, and then the rest had, the rest of the population thought we are in this together, and they're still, years later in South Africa, they're still complaining about water shortages, electricity shortages. Professor David Monda, there's been a lot of debate around this GNU vis-a-vis a coalition. There are those who say this is a coalition, they just don't want to admit it.
Yeah, in terms of the GNU, technically it's a de facto coalition, but it's more of a union of a marriage of the unwilling, and by that I mean the ANC is a left-leaning party, the DA is a right-leaning party. But we find that the interests of the two parties have actually merged in terms of the black corporate elite in the ANC, whose interests merged with the white corporate elites in the DA. And it was really necessary for them to come together to sideline radical revolutionary parties that want to redistribute the wealth. And here we're specifically thinking about the EFF and the MK. I must also add that there's an element of local and regional politics going on there, where you find the ANC has decided to get into an alliance with the Inkatha Freedom Party, which is very strong in KZN, KwaZulu-Natal, and is sidelining MK, which is Zuma's party. So there's an effort there for the ANC to try and also appeal to that Zulu vote and Zulu constituency, which is very large. But I also have to say that we cannot underestimate Jacob Zuma. Remember, this was a Zulu leader who was in the trenches during the liberation struggle. His bona fides, his political stature is still very strong. So it'll be very interesting to see going forward, how that local dynamics of South African politics will play. Will the black corporate elite in the ANC sideline some of their parties like the trade unions, COSATU, and the South African Communist Party? And will those two constituents, the trade unions and the South African Communist Party, will they move out of the ANC and start to form alliances with the EFF and with the MK? So I really see the ANC right now in a very difficult position where they talk the rhetoric of liberation, but it really seems in practice they're in the pockets of corporate elites. And this is a very difficult dynamic that we'll see. I see this as a very unstable coalition for the next 5 years because it's really a union of the unwilling, but it's something that's had to be done.
All right, really quickly, but before we get back to the foreign trips, Sudan, forgotten civil war. I mean, Kenya, we are discussing Haiti, we are deploying to Haiti. Sudan, not as many thousands of kilometers away, Haiti, 12,000 kilometers about. But is Sudan the forgotten war? Why has Sudan gotten lost in the shuffle?
Well, I don't think Sudan has gotten lost. It is that it is a very, very complex conflict. We are really talking about 3 layers of conflict that have not been solved. And I think even regional actors have not found in a foothold in terms of resolving that conflict. It all started with the revolution against Omar al-Bashir. And the military took the coup to remove him. They put a civilian government, Abdallah Hamdok. And then the military came again and removed Abdallah Hamdok. And then the two sides of the military, the Rapid Response Forces and the government of Al-Fatah, basically started fighting. So in terms of resolving this conflict, where are you going back to? Do you want to assert the authority of the coup makers, or do you want to go for the restoration of the civilian governance of Abdallah Hamdok, or what is it that you're doing? Now, in trying to answer those questions, the region is divided, and that's why intervention in Sudan is heavy. In fact, one must say that Sudan is the most intervened country by all conflict by all countries. Egypt is there with its solution. Saudi Arabia and Qatar with their own solution. IGAD is still there. The African Union has had its own initiatives. But all these are not getting to the crux of the matter. Sudan need to move from beyond the Omar al-Bashir government and now move towards civilian. The military has...
all these players. Is that part of the problem, Professor Macharia Munene, yes, that there are foreign interests?
I think that's the main problem.
Yep.
The United Arab Emirates is very deeply involved in that. And it's not just in Sudan, they're involved in almost everywhere, including hiring jets for people.
The shade, Prof, the shade.
You have, the other countries are there. Yeah? And I think the Russians are also not very far. And I think the Chinese will not complain if they are seen. They are all there for their different reasons. How to get these extracontinental forces to stop interfering, because they are looting gold and other minerals in the place for whatever different reasons. Or the land, they are leasing land. A lot of land in Sudan is now actually owned by extracontinental forces, where they are growing the food or the crops they want. And when you talk about this carbon thing, so they're also going to use that too. So there are a lot of interests are there, which are outside Sudan. And since the African countries, the regional bodies, they try very hard, but they are very weak.
But what will
they are weak in part because they are dependent.
Yes, I get that. But what will it take, Dr. Maluki, for sanity to prevail? 9 million people displaced. Rape being used as a weapon of war. Over 220 people killed in the last month in Darfur. What will it take for sanity to prevail?
Well, in my opinion, what we are seeing in Sudan is a reflection of the failure of international institutions that are responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security. Ideally, in any conflict, you'll get different stakeholders, intervening, but there should be institution that can call all the players to order, the Security Council. So it is a reflection of the withering away of the United Nations and its mandate in maintaining the national peace and security, because the UN Security Council should have prevailed upon all those contestants and bring order. So I think the problem in Sudan is lack of that international consensus, because as it has been said by by professors, there are so many players interested, and who is going to take which position, and who is going to call all those into order? It is the UN Security Council. It has been weak. That's why you have seen even in Ukraine, there is war which is unabated. You have seen Hamas and Israel in their own war fighting the way they want. Actually, the world is not safe. And therefore, there is something to do with the systemic failure in the institutions that are responsible for the maintenance of national peace and security.
All right, Professor Monda, lastly on this, I want us to hear what Kenyans have to say on foreign trips. We answer them. So, Professor Monda, Professor Kagwanja says, Sudan, there are 3 layers, it's complex. But isn't Israel and Palestine, the issue in Israel and Palestine, it's a complex issue, but people are talking or pushing to have that issue resolved, whether it's a 2-nation state or however they handle it. So, I mean, is that reason good enough? Does it explain? Or is it more of this is Africa and these are just Africans fighting, it is normal?
Well, I think it really boils down to, who's more, some of these conflicts, some countries are more equal than others. So if you think of Israel in the Middle East, it's a core central interest of the United States and Western allies in the region. Sudan is a peripheral outlier, as you'd mentioned, and Africa more generally. So this is part of the reason why Sudan becomes a forgotten war. The wars in the DRC become forgotten wars, and so on and so forth. But I also must add, in the context of Sudan, we really have to remember Sudan has never had the legacy of democracy, right? So they've had kings when Sudan used to be a peripheral part of Egypt. They've had dictators. We've had Numeri. We've had military regimes from Bashir. They've not had a legacy of building democratic institutions. Secondly, we have to remember this conflict is strongly tied to Sudan losing South Sudan. It lost about 75% of its oil revenue when South Sudan became independent. That's a huge problem. But thirdly, there's the element of these economies of violence, that as much as the political players say they want peace, there are a lot of external and internal actors that thrive on the chaos in Sudan, because UAE, the Russian Wagner group, they're able to export a lot of the gold through the RSF. So, Saudi Arabia and Egypt are able to manipulate al-Burhan's government in Khartoum to advance their own interests. So it's a very tricky situation, and it's unfair to expect the UN to intervene in Sudan when the UN is only as good as the members in the UN. And the international community does not want to contribute troops at this time to go to Sudan. So I see this conflict continuing, and diplomacy being war being used as a tool of diplomacy by both these two generals, because at this time they are both they're not into a peaceful settlement. They want to settle this thing through war. So war will become the tool of diplomacy for a while to come. It's very unfortunate.
All right, thank you.